Greetings and welcome to Writers on Writing. I'm your host, Dr. Brenda Greene, and I'm coming to you from Medgar Evers College, the City University of New York. This radio show is paid for by Medgar Evers College. Writers on Writing comes to you every Sunday and gives you, our listening audience, an opportunity to hear writers from the African diaspora talk about their work, their lives, and their craft. And I am founder and executive director of the Center for Black Literature at Medgar Evers College and also professor of English at the college. I also direct the National Black Writers Conference. And I'm very, very pleased to have with me in conversation on Writers on Writing, Abi Ishola. I hope I'm getting the pronunciation, Ayodeji.
You
You can
got it.
correct. Oh, okay. Okay. Do you mind if I call you Abby?
Please do. That would be great.
Okay. Okay. So just to give you some information about Abby, she is an award-winning multimedia journalist who's written and produced for various platforms, including Elle.com, Essence, Huffington Post, Ebony, and more. And as a reporter and TV producer, she's covered extraordinary people, communities, and events in New York City, Washington, D.C., London, Paris, Nigeria. You have been all over the world. You definitely do represent the African diaspora. So
Yes.
welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Greene. I really appreciate this.
Welcome. So we are going to be discussing your debut novel, Patience is a Subtle Thief. And that novel contains many themes which reverberate around politics and gender and patriarchy and coming of age and mother-daughter relationships. You really put many, many themes into developing this work. And Goodreads coined the term. They said it's a poignant, revealing, and rueful tale of much of how the political can affect the personal. And I thought that was really well done because the political is the context that you're using. So I'd like to begin by talking about the title of the book, which is really interesting. Patience is a Subtle Thief. That's a double entendre. Why did you come up with that title? Why is that title important? What's its significance to you?
Well, thank you for saying that. For a while, I didn't know what to title the book. I had a working title that never felt quite right because, as you said earlier, the book covers so much. And one of the main themes in the book is people having to wait on things that feel like they should be our human right, and that should be our human right. In the case of, Nigeria, it would be democracy in a lot of ways, and of course, running water and amenities that should we even call them amenities? Again, they should be human rights. So there was a time in Nigeria's history where there were several military dictatorships year after year after year, decade after decade, and the people had been promised democracy decade after decade. And then came a time when there was a man named Chief MKO Abiola who ran for president. And I compare him to Obama because he really unified people from all ends of Nigeria, which is hard to do in politics in Nigeria, if you know anything about Nigerian politics. And everyone was excited. He injected hope back into the country and said, we will begin to be prosperous. Everyone voted for him, things went well, but then the military reneged on its promise. So, it goes back to people waiting for decades for this democracy. And then, of course, my characters, they're going through their own personal journeys of waiting on things. One of my characters, he's waiting to have his dreams realized to become a petroleum engineer. My main character, she's been waiting to see and be reunited with her mother. So I really wanted to put in a title the idea of waiting and how waiting can sometimes feel like it's like something has been stolen from you.
Yes, and the whole idea of patience, it gives it another kind of spin, though. It gives it a more positive spin that if you wait, all things will come to fruition. But that's not necessarily so. I don't want to give away the novel. So it
Yeah,
really shows how you can be patient. And sometimes you get what you want and sometimes you don't, you know. Yeah.
exactly. And
So
that's why I use the word subtle, because I do believe in patience and I believe it is a virtue. You know, I always use, of course, Dr. King as an example of, you know, how he was very patient for change to come about and how he had concrete plans on how he wanted to go about changing things in this country. And some of that paid off. But as we know now, there are a lot of things that are not right. So, you know, subtle thief, you know, it's somewhat of a thief where some things do come to fruition, but some things don't. And some things take a lot of time. So that was part of why I used the subtle part of it. And then, of course,
and
patience being a virtue, you know, that's a
right,
spin on
yes.
that.
Yes, it is.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then you chose to situate the novel during that period in Nigerian history, but it's also really relevant to what's going on now politically. Would you say how does this also reflect the ongoing issues and struggles in Nigeria around politics and family and the tensions and the rifts between different groups?
Yeah. Well, Nigeria did eventually get its democracy, I want to say in 1997. But even after getting that democracy, it's still, things still have not been right. And that democracy is questioned because is it really a democracy where people can come out? You know, just recently there was an election, people came out to
Right.
vote. There were a lot of people that intimidated the voters. Voters were beaten. Voters were told they had to vote for certain candidates. It was really sad what happened, and that's been happening ever since the 90s. You know, things haven't really changed, even with the so-called democracy that Nigeria has. So yes, it's still very relevant now, and I think that that theme is relevant in a lot of countries and in a lot of
Yes.
places. You know, I think about the struggles here in America for
Yes.
Black people, our rights, you know, and how we move about in this country, not feeling like we belong here. So yes, it's still very relevant.
Right. So again, it's relevant. So just give the audience a brief synopsis of what happens, what this story is about, without, of course, revealing the ending.
Sure. Well, my main character, her name is Patience, and she has been estranged from her mother for over a decade. And estranged meaning it was a forced estrangement. She doesn't know where her mother is, and her father has an idea of where her mother is, but he's, you know, not the best parent, and she's being raised by him and his wife. And there comes a time when she starts to find some clues. It gets to the point where she's 18 and she goes out to college and she starts learning some things about where her mother is. And so she embarks on this journey to reunite with her. But in that journey, she realizes she needs money to get to her mother. So she starts doing some shady dealings to get the money that she needs to get to her mother. Once she meets, you know, a group of other people that have goals and things that they want, and are, you know, basically revert to things that are not very legal to get the things that they want. Part of it, you know, is me exploring the idea of 419 in Nigeria and how 419, for those that don't know, is advanced fee fraud. So, of course, there was a time when Nigerians came to be known for people that would email you and say,
Yes.
hey, you want to free this prince? And I'll send you a big sum of money. So that's advanced fee fraud or 419. So I really wanted to put a human story behind that. Like, why would anyone in another country feel desperate enough to do that, to swindle someone out of their life savings? What's happening on the ground there that has led people to do these things? So the group of friends that she meets, they all have their own individual stories in the book, and they come together in an interesting way. So
It's also, I think, a very central theme in the book is the importance of the mother-daughter relationship
mhm,
and what happens if you don't have that connection what happens if you don't have someone who's there to nurture and support you? Talk about that a little, and why you were motivated to tell that story.
Yes, that was big for me, and I think I will say that I've met girls from Nigeria and in Nigeria who have lived that, where their mothers were ousted from their lives. Like they were basically pulled away from their mothers. And that going back to patriarchy and who ends up having the child. In America, we're used to seeing the mother get custody of the child.
Yes.
But in Nigeria, if the man wants his child, whether he's going to care for that child properly or not, he will get that child. So I've met so many girls that experienced that. They were ripped away from their mothers, and in the way they carry themselves in the world and some of the stories that I've heard, it really affected them. You know, they had to move about making decisions for themselves that they probably wouldn't have embarked on if they had that motherly figure in their lives. So that was what really motivated me. I mean, I even have family members that have experienced that. So I really wanted to explore what could come of a girl who has been pulled away from her mother and she wants this relationship with her mother, but she has no idea where her mother is and how to foster that kind of relationship. So that's basically what motivated me to do that.
I'm reminded of one of my favorite books is Marita Golden's Migrations of the Heart. I don't know if you're familiar with that. She wrote that in the 70s. But it also
Wow.
talks about an African American woman who marries a Nigerian man. Very, during the height of Black Power movement, wanting to go back to the continent. And she's educated. And as a result of being educated, she gets a job in the university. But there's built-in tension from the other women in Nigeria and her husband wanting her to have certain roles, and the result, that the conflict that results from that. And she gets to the point, they have a son, and she gets to the point where she realized she doesn't want this. She wants to go back. And she
Wow.
cannot, she cannot take her son. You know what? There would be a big fight. So Migration of the Heart, it's till she ends up finding a way to get out of Nigeria and to take her son with her. It's a
Oh my God.
fascinating novel. It's used in many classrooms, but it's like you said, it's a story that resounds with so many people,
Yes.
and not only in Nigeria, but in other countries. I'm sure you see situations like that in the southeastern countries, Asian, Arabic, all of that,
Mhm.
and it's important. So it's really what you've really done with this novel is to give us a feminist spin, a feminist,
Yes.
the power of the woman. So the woman is not relegated to a certain role. So just to
Yeah.
follow up with that, who are some of the people who have influenced you as a writer? I always think of writers being in conversation with other writers. Who are some of the people who've influenced you?
Well, Toni Morrison, I mean, everyone, I feel like every
Yes.
Black woman will say her name first, and I see her behind you there. And I get goosebumps just thinking about her work and what she did for Black women and Black girls. I remember reading the Lewis I growing up in Miami and not really feeling beautiful and not really loving my dark skin, and reading that book and feeling like I saw myself on the page and I felt identified. So I think she is one of the writers that has inspired me and also given life to my story. So I will always name her first. And of course, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I think she's done an amazing job of really kind of creating a contemporary voice for Africans or people who are writing about Africa. Because of course we have the Chinua Achebes who've written amazing books. Yes, but she, has become that new age version of a Nigerian author or African author who's really shown what it means to be a young person living in Nigeria or a young person from Nigeria and living in whatever country. So she's inspired me a great deal. And I read a lot of books from various authors from Africa and Nigeria in particular, some that I can't even name, but I know that their books resonate with me because I grew up in America, and but I did spend time in Nigeria. I was living in Nigeria around the time that this book takes place in the 90s, early 90s. So reading the work of Nigerian authors really brings me back home in a way, and it also gives me permission to write about Nigeria in a way that I need as a writer. So yes, that's what I would say in terms of inspiration.
Just as a follow-up, you talk about Toni Morrison, and she says that a novel is a public investigation of a private matter. So,
Mm.
in other words, a novel answers a question you have when you're investigating. You've alluded to that, in our conversation as to what that question was. But can you reflect on that a little bit more? That your novel being a public investigation of a private matter.
Yeah, it's interesting. The first thing I think about is really accepting the fact that that as a writer for me, writing about things about Nigeria or Africa that may not be so appealing. I could imagine some of my people feeling like, well, why are you exposing this about our country?
Telling the
And as we know,
secrets, right?
yes. So it does feel like a private matter. And as a writer, you struggle with how much to reveal. But I think for me, especially having a journalism background, I've always asked myself, well, what is true? What is the truth? And of course, it's fiction, but at the same time, what do I know to be true? And I use the truth as my North Star. I will always revert back to what I feel to be true. And also, what is my observation of my country and my people? What can we do better at? What can we improve on? And it's not for me to judge as well, because again, my characters are doing things that are not so great, but at the same time, they have their reasons. And I think that that is the human experience. We've all done things that are great, and sometimes we do things that are not so great. And it's not always because we're bad. It's because of circumstances, and it's also because of how governments and countries basically handle people, and how people end up having to make really, really tough decisions based on their lives. So yes, that's what I would say.
That's great. You reference the journalism, and kind of implied in that is that you believe writers have a responsibility,
Yes.
not only to tell the truths, but do writers also have a political and social responsibility? And if they do, how does that impact? You talked about in your writing, but did you find challenges in moving from that genre of nonfiction to writing a novel? I know that I end up doing more academic writing, nonfiction writing, and it would be really. I think it would be a challenge to do the creative writing. What was that process like for you?
It was a long and hard process, to be honest. And it was difficult because I think there were times where I overanalyzed the history and wanted to get everything correct. And I remember my husband telling me, you have creative license. There's certain things that you can do that are okay. So that was really good advice. And I was able to kind of like let go of being so obsessive with facts. But I think that's where for most journalists, you want to get the facts straight. So you end up, maybe sacrificing on creativity at times. So that was a real struggle for me. Finding voice, finding my voice as an author of fiction, and letting go of the voice as a journalist, as someone that's reporting the news or reporting a story. So yes, it was a juggle. It was a real juggle for me, but I think I found my way.
Well, I'm sure you were looking at the language that your favorite writers use, and looking
Yes.
at how they tell story. That ends up internalizing, helping you to internalize how to use the language. So, what talk
Mhm.
about what your writing process is like? Um,
Well,
Go on.
my writing process is funny because writing this book it was hard to find a process because it took me several years to write this book. And I had picked it up and put it down several times. I had kids, life happened. But I think eventually when I found my flow, it became being able to go to a coffee shop, a place that had food that I could eat, not have to really get up and go anywhere and just sit down and really bang out chapter after chapter. What I do is sound is very important to me when I'm writing. So I would listen to Fela Kuti's music, but I would use only his instrumental parts. As you know, his instrumental parts are very long. So I was able to, use the pace of his instrumentals to find my pace with writing. And I would also listen to The Sound of Rain on YouTube. But if The Sound of Rain was putting me to sleep, I go to Fela Kuti's music. So yes.
Okay. So that's interesting. You're showing that parallel between the artistic forms. That
Yes.
music is really another way of writing.
It
Yeah.
really is. The rhythm of it is it's very, very important. And right now I'm writing another book and I'm looking for the right music for that book, which is interesting because Fela Kuti's music, it doesn't really flow for that particular book.
Mhm.
So
Right.
it just goes to show how important sound and music is when it comes to story and art.
Right. So you anticipated about what your next project is, and you're doing another novel. Are you doing
Yes,
another novel?
I'm actually working on another novel. It's taking me some time. I had to rework, the whole outline that I had because it wasn't working the way that I thought it would, which is good because I got some great advice from a few authors. They all said that when I noticed they all said in different ways, when your ideas start to fall apart, that's when you're on the verge of finding the story. And that actually happened for me.
Oh, that's interesting. When your
Yes,
ideas
yes.
start to fall apart.
Yeah, it's like you're right there. So, and I think it goes back to not giving up because sometimes when things fall apart, we think, oh, I throw in the towel. But I think that's when you're right there at that point where if you let go a little bit, you'll find what you need. So that's where I am at the moment. So, working on it now.
And what message would you have for writers, particularly those who are beginning, at that stage where they make like you, they're moving from one genre to another, and then to our student writers and emerging writers. You also have the multimedia background, so all of that comes together.
Yes, I would say listen to people, listen to people's stories. It's interesting, living in New York was really, really important for me as a writer because I've met so many people with amazing stories. And I think that when you listen to people, you're able to find story in almost everything, and you're able to really write to the nuances of the human experience. So listen to people, ask people questions. And of course, as a journalist, that's what you're doing most of the time. You're asking people questions and you're finding the story. So that's one. And two, read books that you feel give you permission to write. And no, you don't necessarily need permission, but sometimes I think that when we write, we don't writers are really hard on themselves. Oh, this isn't good enough. Oh, no one's going to read this. But when you read someone else's work and you find parts of yourself in people's work, that's the permission you need that, okay, I think I'm on the right track. I just have to keep going. So those are my two main forms of advice I would give to writers. And just never give up, believe in your story. I had no idea what was going to happen. And that's the thing about writing a book. You sometimes don't know if you're ever going to find a publisher or if you're ever
Yes.
really going to get it. But you just have to keep writing, keep writing, keep writing. I always say chip away at it. Just keep chipping away at it. And eventually it comes together.
Right. So share with our listening audience how they can get your book and your website, any information that you want to share as we come to a close.
Thank you. Well, Patience is a Subtle Thief is available wherever books are sold. My website is aishola.com. That's AISHOLA.com. And I think that's it. Did you ask me another question? I'm sorry.
As I just said, how people can get your book. And of course, we always encourage people to support our independent Black bookstores, and please do that. And you can get it online, but you can find out more about Abi if you go to her website. And I encourage our listeners to support Abi. This is a wonderful book, very fast read. It's a good storyteller.
That means so much coming from you, I have to say. I am so honored to even sit here and talk to you. So thank you so much.
Welcome. So remember, the writer's always reading, the reader's always writing. Keep reading and writing. Empower yourselves as readers and writers. This radio show is paid for by Medgar Evers College. And thank you so much for visiting with us, Abi. And good luck on your next project. And we're here to support you. Thank you
so much.
You're welcome.